In the previous video, we upgraded the drive system on a 670cc Predator-powered Renault with a Comet 94C torque converter CVT clutch. It was a lot of work, but now we have a drive system that's rated for the power of this V-twin lawnmower engine. One of the last things we need to do is modify the exhaust system to clear this crossmember. Now, if you recall, we had to widen the engine cradle to accommodate the larger CVT clutch, and we had to raise the engine up about an inch. So before we can put the engine back in the car, we have to modify this exhaust header to fit the upgraded engine cradle. Uh-oh! Now here's something I didn't account for, and that's the wider engine cradle interferes with the exhaust along this rail. Now we had only accounted for a clearance issue along this crossmember here, and this is a bit of a problem because we can't cut the rail to clear the exhaust, and I'm not sure this header can be modified to clear the rail. Well, give me a second and I'll take the wrap off the header and we can get a better look at the problem. Okay, well, this freshly installed exhaust wrap has been removed, and I also went ahead and cut the header at the collector, and that'll give us clearance in order to install the header on the engine. Let's see if we can come up with a solution once the header's mounted up to the engine. Well, this ain't good. You see, there just isn't enough space to properly reroute the exhaust to clear the rail, and at the same time, keep the bung for the wideband sensor. That sucks. Well, let's take a look up top and see if we have any options for a quick fix. Well, it looks like we could lengthen the pipes to shift the exhaust this way. Now, lengthening this pipe shouldn't be a big problem, but getting this pipe to line up with the rest of the exhaust is going to be difficult. And to make matters worse, this header is made from an 1.25 inch outside diameter tubing, which is hard to get on short notice, and I don't have any extra in stock. I think instead of modifying this exhaust by hacking it up, we should probably just make a new header. But once again, I don't have the material right now, and that's going to take a week or so to get everything we need. And we don't have the time for that. The good news is, when we do build a new exhaust, well, we can try to get the header pipes closer to the same length, and that should be a nice upgrade. But in the meantime, we need to get this car back on the road as soon as possible. So for a temporary solution, I think we can run the stock muffler that came with the engine. Now, this is not ideal, but I would rather do this than to waste time trying to modify the header to fit with parts I don't have. The good news is there's plenty of space in the engine compartment to run this stock muffler, and I still have most of the tailpipe assembly that we fabricated a few months ago. And yeah, it looks like the downpipe will clear the wider engine cradle just fine. So the only problem with running the stock muffler temporarily is this 36mm carburetor will not work well with the restrictive exhaust, but we still have the stock carburetor that came with the engine, so we can temporarily put that back on. Now keep in mind, like I said, this is all going to be temporary, and we're doing this so we can put the car back together and road test the new drive system. And yeah, we're going to lose some power, and that'll suck, but it'll be interesting to compare the performance results with the setup, so let's just make this happen and see what kind of data we get. Fast forward a few hours and the engine's on the hoist and ready to be dropped back into the car. As you can see, the stock 2-barrel carburetor is also back on the engine, and just because it's a stock part doesn't mean it's bad. You know, all things considered, this carburetor performed fine after we adjusted the jet size slightly. Anyway, over here we have the engine cradle installed in the Renault, and it's ready to accept the Predator engine. This upgraded cradle is significantly stronger after we widened it, and I'm excited to see how the car performs with the new clutch. All we have to do now is drop the engine in and hit the road. Fast forward a few hours and the engine's finally back in the car. Now, the stock Predator exhaust has plenty of clearance, and while I'm not thrilled about using it, it's only temporary and will be replaced soon enough with a better exhaust. Now over here, this gizmo is part of the throttle linkage, and previously we modified this linkage to work with the motorcycle carburetors. Well, once more we had to modify the linkage to work with the stock Predator carburetor. The only thing we didn't connect was the choke. Actually, the choke cable is still in place, but it's zip tied to keep it out of the way, and hooking it up would require too much effort. I think at this point we're ready to take the car out for a test drive, but as luck would have it, it's raining right now, and there's going to be a slight delay. But for fun, we can still start the engine and see how the clutch works while the car is still on the jack stands. It's good to be back in the driver's seat again. Let's light this candle and see how the clutch works. Ooh, the voltage is a bit low. Yeah, without the choke, the engine's struggling to stay alive. Well, the clutch works exactly as expected, and I gotta say, this engine's really quiet with the full exhaust system, and it seems to run perfectly once it's warmed up. Now, are you folks getting excited for the test drive? Let's check that weather. And it's still raining. So the reason we can't drive the car in the rain is the belt drive doesn't like getting wet, and since this car is just a fun toy, that's not a big deal. But since the seasons are changing, and I reckon we'll have some more wet weather as time moves on, I think perhaps we should build some sort of splash shield for the belt drive. So off camera, I went ahead and welded up the framework for a lightweight splash shield that'll mount to the engine cradle. Let's see how it fits. Well, it seems to fit fine, and I reckon we'll need to add a piece of lightweight material here to block any road spray from getting on the drive belt. So this splash shield isn't going to be perfect. It's only meant to keep the belt dry if the roads are wet, and it isn't intended to make the car drivable in the rain. Since this car is rear-engined and lightweight, I have no desire to actually drive this death trap in the rain. But this simple splash shield should help if we manage to run through some wet patches in the road. So for a cover, I'm using some chloroplast and obviously zip ties to hold it in place. Alright, let's see how it looks on the car. Not too shabby. This should keep the belt drive clear of any road spray and debris, but it ain't perfect and that's fine. Well, it's the next day and the car's off the jack stands and ready to test drive. Let's see how that weather is doing. Oh boy. Well, unfortunately it's still raining. Okay, well, I'll make you folks a deal. Let's fade to black, and in the next scene I'll be in the driver's seat with the engine running and the cameras rolling. See ya on the other side. Well, looks like we have a break in the weather. Let's take this car for a spin before it starts raining again. Okay, the clutch grabbed. I was getting worried for a second. Now immediately I can tell the car has changed, and first of all, it's extremely quiet, which is disturbing. Anyway, if you're new to the channel, this car is equipped with 2 transmissions. It has the original 4-speed gearbox, and it has the Comet 94 CVT belt drive transmission. The CVT makes the car sound weird because it's always changing ratios, and that's just the way it is. The nice thing about the CVT is you can drive the car like it has an automatic transmission. Now, leaving the car in 3rd gear provides a nice overall ratio for in-town driving, and once we hit the open road, we can put it in 4th gear for a good cruising ratio. With this setup, 1st and 2nd gear on the manual transmission aren't really required for most driving situations. Now normally the car is a lot faster, but I'm trying to get a feel for how the new clutch is working, so I'm being real light on the accelerator. Now as some of you folks know, I'm hearing impaired, so this quiet exhaust is actually tough to get used to. Previously, the top speed on this car was 67 miles per hour, but it's scary to go that fast, so today we're not going to push it. Anyway, I doubt it will go that fast with the current carburetor and exhaust. Now, in previous videos, I also mentioned the car was scary to drive, and some folks wondered why. Well, it's a 54-year-old car, and it could probably use some fresh shocks and a few other bits that aren't in the budget. So we try to keep the speed under 60 miles per hour. Although with this new CVT clutch, and perhaps a good exhaust and carburetor, I'll bet this car could top out at about 70 miles an hour. Well, so far everything seems fine with the new clutch, and just for giggles, let's do an acceleration test. Now, keep in mind the results ain't going to be good because, well, the muffler is very restrictive. The time to beat is 21.85 seconds for the 0 to 50 and 29.77 seconds for the 0 to 55. And of course, we'll be doing this test by starting off in third gear. Wow, for the 0 to 50, we were about 6 seconds slower, and for the 0 to 55, we were a whopping 14 seconds slower. The clutch was as smooth as butter during the acceleration, and it sounds like the clutch went into overdrive at about 30 miles per hour, which is about the same as the old clutch. Now, I kept my eye on the tachometer, which, by the way, I don't trust. Anyway, according to the tach, once the car started rolling, the tach indicated the engine was spinning between 2200 and 2500 RPM, all the way up to 55 miles per hour. So that's interesting that the engine stayed at peak torque all throughout the acceleration. Now, after 50 miles an hour, well, the engine sort of fell flat on its face, and the time it took to get from 50 to 55 was an extra 16 seconds. So 16 seconds to gain an additional 5 miles per hour, that's mind-boggling. So clearly the engine's just not making any power, and that's not a big deal. We know exactly what's going on, and we can sort that out with modifications that we've previously done and have proven to increase performance of the engine. So of course I'm sitting in the driver's seat, and let me try to describe how this car feels. Well, first of all, like I mentioned before, the clutch is as smooth as butter, which is nice. Now, since the engine is equipped with a huge muffler, the car is quiet, and overall it feels like I'm driving a well-engineered Japanese-built ATV. It's a little boring, but at the same time it's actually kinda nice, and what I mean by that is, I'm not worried about stuff failing. Everything just feels solid. But don't worry, we'll bring back the excitement soon enough. Anyway, for the 670cc engine, the Comet 94 clutch is the way to go, and if you like quiet, well, then the stock muffler seems to do the trick, but it's gonna rob you of some performance, as we can see by these test results. So today wasn't too bad. We managed to get the car back on the road by making a few compromises. I think obviously the next step is to fabricate an exhaust system that fits the car and see how that affects performance. I say we head back to the shop before it starts raining again. I want to take a better look at the drive belt and make sure everything's still okay. And we're back. Let's see how that drive belt held up. You know, at first glance, everything looks fine. There's a slight amount of belt dust, and at this point I'm not alarmed because the belt has to break in. So I'm going to call this normal. I think the only real issue here is the exhaust system. I mean, it's just killing the performance of the engine, but we're going to fix that soon enough. As luck would have it, it started raining again, so that pretty much changes our plans, and we decided to pull the engine once again. Now, there's a couple of reasons why we pulled the engine. The first one is we need to fabricate a new drive system for the alternator, and this time around we're going to try mounting the alternator on this side of the engine. We'll get into all the details in another video, but since we have the engine out, I want to take a better look at the Comet clutch. Now keep in mind, we are very happy with the performance of the clutch so far, and the reason we pulled it is so it can be lubricated. So before we get into the clutch, let's take a look at the drive belt. So this belt is symmetrical, and what that means is it can be installed any way we want. However, there is an arrow, and generally you want the arrow pointing towards the engine. The idea is, once the belt breaks in, well, for best performance and longer belt life, the belt should be reinstalled the same way, so that explains the arrow. Let's take a look at the clutch. Now, I'm not sure how this clutch is supposed to come apart, but I used a flat screwdriver and a brass hammer. Now, I only applied very light pressure to the screwdriver and tapped on this extractor bolt that came with the clutch, and after a little bit, the clutch cover slid off. So it looks like some sort of adhesive was used to hold all this together during shipping, but I don't think we need to use any when we reassemble the clutch. It looks like the clutch was set up with 6 pucks, and according to the documentation, these pucks should be 53.5 grams each. Well, let's see if that's true. Now, my scale has seen better days, so let's not be too judgmental. And the first one comes in at 48.5 grams. Let's see how the other ones do. Well, it looks like all the pucks are on the light side, but they're consistent. Let's see how a brand new set of 53.5 gram pucks do. Well, they're about a gram heavier than the other pucks, so it looks like the pucks are close enough. And keep in mind, this scale has never been calibrated. So inside the clutch, there should be a spring, and as I recall, this clutch should have a pink spring in it. And it does. So with 6 of these pucks and a pink spring, we can check the engagement speed of this clutch by looking at the spring chart. If you recall, during the acceleration test with the accelerator mashed to the floor, the engine revved up and held at 2500 RPM throughout the test. Now this engine doesn't have a governor, so it's free to rev as high as it wants, but it stayed at 2500 RPM, which also happens to be close to where the engine develops peak torque. I find this very interesting. Is the clutch tuned to do that? Maybe, maybe not. I guess we won't know for sure until we put a better exhaust system on the engine. It'll be interesting to see how the clutch reacts when the engine develops more power. Anyway, let's look at the spring chart. Alright, well this is the part number of the puck. It's at 206514, and we have 6 of them. And we have a pink spring. So right here is the engagement RPM of the clutch. According to this chart, the clutch engages at 1800 RPM, or at least it should. Now, that's just the engagement speed, and for this engine that seems about right. I think for now I'm inclined to leave the clutch alone, and we'll continue with the exhaust and carburetor experiments until we get to a point where clutch tuning makes more sense. So before I can put the clutch back on the engine, I need to lubricate the bits with dry film lubricant. Well, of course, Comet makes a special lubricant, and of course they recommend this stuff, but in the past I've used dry graphite lube, which is about the same price as the Comet lubricant. Meh, they claim it's not the same stuff, but who knows. But whatever lube you use, never use oil or grease. Stuff like that'll pick up dirt and cause premature wear on the clutch. Now, the interesting part is, this brand new clutch doesn't come pre-lubricated, so what's the deal with that? Well, whatever. Anyway, it's still raining and it looks like we won't be able to do any more tests this week, so perhaps now is a good time to sign off, and I'll see you next time. Until then.